He left her for being too ordinary. Then a luxury yacht came for the woman who became untouchable. Damien Voss looked his pregnant wife in the eyes and told her she wasn't enough. Not in private, not gently. He said it in front of his mistress, in the penthouse Mara had helped him furnish, while the woman wearing his girlfriend's perfume leaned against the kitchen counter and watched like it was entertainment. 7 months pregnant, standing in the rain-damp coat she hadn't taken off yet, Mara heard the man she married say she was too ordinary for the life he was building, and she felt something inside her go completely, irreversibly quiet. This is the story of what happened to the woman he threw away. If you've ever been told you weren't enough by someone who should have known better, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels because this one goes all the way. The rain had been coming down since 4 in the afternoon. The kind of Seattle rain that doesn't announce itself, it just settles in and stays, soaking into everything until you forget what dry felt like. Mara Ellison stood in the elevator of the Voss Tower residential floor with her overnight bag pressed against her stomach, not because she was protecting herself, but because she needed something to hold on to. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. They'd been shaking since the phone call 2 hours ago when Damien's assistant, his assistant, not Damien, had called to let her know that Damien would be home early and that she should be ready to have a conversation. She had known, standing in the hallway of the literacy center with 23 copies of a children's book about a girl who learns to read her own name tucked under her arm, that this conversation wasn't going to be the kind you recover from. The elevator opened. Damien was already standing in the living room with his jacket still on. He hadn't poured a drink, hadn't loosened his tie, hadn't done any of the things he usually did when he came home. He was just standing there, and beside him, sitting on the arm of the couch they had picked out together at a showroom. In Belltown 14 months ago was Serena Vale. Mara had met Serena exactly twice before. Once at a charity event Damien had insisted she attend, where Serena had looked at Mara's dress and said nothing, which said everything. Once at a dinner where Serena had laughed at something Damien said in a way that lasted about 3 seconds too long. Both times Mara had pushed the feeling down. She was 7 months pregnant. She was tired. She was not the kind of woman who manufactured problems. She stood in the doorway of her own home and looked at her husband and the woman sitting on her couch, and understood, completely and without any remaining doubt, that she had not manufactured a single thing. "Close the door," Damien said. Mara closed the door. She didn't take off her coat. Damien started talking. She watched his mouth move and caught about 60% of the words, the way you do when your body is absorbing a shock and your brain is trying to protect you from the full voltage of it. He said things like, "This isn't working, and I've been honest with myself and the life I need to build." He said Serena's name twice, without any particular hesitation, the way you say the name of someone you've stopped trying to hide. He said that Mara was a good person. He actually said that. Good person, like he was writing a reference letter. But that good wasn't the same as right. And then he said the word, "You're just Mara. You're ordinary. You know that. You've always known that." Serena didn't react. She didn't look away. She sat there on the arm of the couch with her ankles crossed and watched Mara the way someone watches a scene in a movie they've already seen. Mara's hand was on her stomach. She wasn't sure when that had happened. "Ordinary," Mara said. "I don't mean it as an insult." "I know you don't," she said. "That's actually worse." Damien ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired, which made Mara want to scream, because she had spent the last 7 months building a human being inside her body, while managing a literacy program on a budget that required her to write 3 grant applications every quarter, and he looked tired. "The people I work with," he said, "the world I'm operating in now, it requires a certain Mara. It requires someone who can move in those spaces. Someone like Serena," Mara said. Serena tilted her head very slightly, like she was deciding whether to be flattered or bored. "It's not just Serena," Damien said. "It's about who I am now, what I'm building. You can't be married to a woman who runs a children's reading program," Mara said, "because it doesn't look right at the table." Damien didn't say anything, which was its own kind of answer. Mara looked around the room. She'd put the curtains up herself, standing on a step stool at 34 weeks pregnant, because the decorator had gotten the measurements wrong, and she'd wanted it done before the baby came. She'd chosen the rug. She'd spent 2 Saturdays arguing with Damien about the bookshelves before he'd finally admitted she was right about the placement. This room had her in it everywhere you looked, if you knew how to look. Damien didn't know how to look. She picked up her overnight bag. "I'll send someone for my things," she said. "Mara, don't," she said it quietly, not angry, just done. "Don't do the version where you're kind about it. I'd rather you just let me leave." She pressed the elevator button. Serena finally spoke. Her voice was the kind of voice that sounded expensive, low, deliberate, a little bored. "It'll be okay," she said. "You're the kind of person who always lands on her feet." Mara turned and looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "I am." The elevator opened. Mara stepped inside. The doors closed behind her, and she stood alone in the small mirrored box as it descended, and she watched her own reflection, wet coat, overnight bag, one hand flat against her stomach, and she did not cry. Not because she was strong, not because she didn't want to, but because some things are too large for tears and you have to carry them in a different part of your body entirely, somewhere lower and quieter, where they become something else over time. She walked out into the Seattle rain and called her sister. Nadia picked up on the second ring. "He did it," Mara said. A pause. "I'm coming to get you. I'm on 2nd Avenue. Stay there. Don't move." Mara sat on a wet bench outside a coffee shop that was already closed for the evening and looked at the street and waited. A couple walked by sharing an umbrella. A man in a delivery uniform jogged past. The city kept moving the way cities do, completely indifferent to the specific disaster happening inside any one person standing in it. Nadia's car pulled up 11 minutes later. Nadia was 4 years older than Mara and had her mother's jaw and their father's refusal to soften things. She took one look at Mara and didn't ask how she was. She just said, "Get in." And when Mara was buckled, she pulled into traffic and said, "Tell me everything." Mara told her. By the time she finished, Nadia had pulled over twice, once to let a fire truck pass, once because she needed to stop driving while she processed certain specific things Damien had said, because Nadia was the kind of person who needed to be stationary when her anger peaked or she made bad decisions. "Ordinary," Nadia said, very flat. That was the word. "While you're carrying his child. While I'm carrying his child." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "He's going to regret this in a way that doesn't have a name yet." "Maybe," Mara said. "I really don't care right now." And that was true. In that car, on that night, she genuinely didn't care about Damien's regret, or Damien's future, or what would happen to the version of herself she'd been trying to fit into his life for 2.5 years. All she cared about was the weight in her belly, which was her daughter. She already knew it was a daughter. Had known for weeks, hadn't told Damien yet, because she'd been waiting for the right moment. And now there was no right moment, and she was going to have this daughter alone. And whether there was a bed somewhere she could put her body into before it gave out. Nadia's apartment was in Eastlake, a small second-floor unit that smelled like coffee, and whatever candle Nadia was burning that month, and underneath that, something older, their childhood, maybe, or just the particular warmth of being with the one person on Earth who would not require an explanation. Nadia made her tea she didn't drink, and toast she ate 3 bites of, and then set up the pull-out sofa with sheets that had a pattern of small crabs on them because they'd belonged to their grandmother, and Nadia had never gotten rid of them even. Though they were too small and too faded, and she knew they were ridiculous. Mara lay on those sheets and stared at the ceiling and thought about ordinary. She thought about the way the word had come out of Damien's mouth, not cruel, which might have been easier, just matter of fact. Like he was noting something about the weather, or explaining why a business deal hadn't panned out. She thought about the way Serena had watched, not triumphant, just present. Like she'd been waiting for a necessary administrative process to conclude. She thought about how many mornings she'd woken up in that penthouse and made coffee and gone over grant applications at the kitchen island while Damien slept. And how she'd told herself that this was enough, that this quiet, useful life was what she wanted. That being the kind of woman who kept her head down and did the work was its own kind of dignity. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the letter he had sent her 3 years ago, the one she'd read once and put in the bottom of a box because she hadn't wanted to think about what it meant. She thought about the word controlling in that letter. Controlling beneficiary. She hadn't wanted it. She'd chosen the literacy center. She'd chosen the small apartment before Damien, the bus routes, the grant applications. She'd chosen ordinary because ordinary had felt honest. She wasn't sure anymore whether she'd been honest or just afraid. 3 weeks passed. Mara stayed in Nadia's apartment and went to the literacy center every day because the kids showed up every day and they didn't care that her marriage had ended or that she cried in the bathroom twice during the first week or that she ate peanut butter crackers for dinner more nights than she should have. They cared about whether she'd brought the next book in the series about the girl who learned to navigate the world by reading signs, and she had, so they were satisfied. She was 8 months pregnant. She was fine. She was not fine. Both of these were true simultaneously, and she stopped trying to resolve the contradiction. Damien called 4 times in the first week. She let all 4 go to voicemail. His lawyer's office called twice. She forwarded those to the attorney she'd hired, with what remained of the money in her personal account. Serena did not call. Mara had not expected her to. What she had not expected was Julian Mercer. He showed up on a Thursday afternoon when Mara was leaving the literacy center, carrying a bag of books that needed rebinding, and walking slowly because walking fast had become physically inadvisable. He was standing beside a dark car, not leaning on it or looking at his phone, or doing any of the things people do when they're waiting, just standing, hands at his sides, watching the street. And when she came through the door, he turned and looked directly at her and said, "Miss Ellison?" She stopped. "Yes, my name is Julian Mercer. I'm the chairman of the Ellison Maritime Foundation." He paused, and she could see him measuring something, not her reaction, so much as whether he'd misjudged the timing. "I think you know why I'm here."
She did know.
The knowledge came up from somewhere she'd been sitting on for 3 years, like a sound you'd been trying not to hear finally breaking through. "I told my grandfather I didn't want it," she said. "He told me you'd say that," Julian said. "He also told me to wait until you changed your mind." "I haven't changed my mind." Okay, he didn't argue. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. "When you do." She took the card. She didn't throw it away. That was the first decision. She went home and sat with the card and thought about the letter again. Her grandfather, Edmund Ellison, had built the Ellison Maritime Foundation over 40 years of quiet, deliberate work shipping contracts, port infrastructure, private investment, the kind of slow institutional power that doesn't make headlines because it doesn't need to. When he died 2 years ago, he'd left her the controlling share, not because she was the oldest or the most visible, or the one who'd shown the most interest in finance, but because she was the one, he'd written in his letter, who would know when she was ready. She'd thought she wasn't ready. She was starting to think she'd been wrong. She called Julian the next morning. He answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Ms. Ellison. Tell me what controlling beneficiary means in practice," she said. No summary version. The real version. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice shifted, not warmer exactly, but more direct, like a gear change. "Means you have decision-making authority over the foundation's assets, contracts, and investment portfolio. You'd need to come aboard literally, in this case. We operate from the Aurelia, a vessel in the harbor." "A boat," Mara said. "A ship," Julian said gently. "How much?" he told her. She sat very still in Nadia's kitchen, looking at the small crabs on the dish towel. Nadia had hung over the oven handle and absorbed a number that was so far outside her daily reality that it didn't feel like a number at all. It felt like a fact about someone else's life. "And my grandfather left this to me," she said. "To me specifically." He said. Julian paused. He said you were the one who would wait until you needed it. He said the others would have spent it looking impressive, nah. You'd spend it doing something. Mara pressed her hand flat against her stomach. Her daughter moved a slow roll, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. "I need a few more days," Mara said. "Take the time you need." She took 4 days. During those 4 days, 3 things happened that she did not yet know were connected. The first thing, Damien's lawyer sent a formal proposal for a divorce settlement that included, buried in paragraph 9, a clause about the Ellison Maritime Foundation. Specifically, it proposed that in the event of Mara's assumption of foundation assets, a percentage would be designated as marital property subject to equitable division. Her attorney caught it and called her immediately. He knew, her attorney said. He's known about the foundation for at least 6 months, and he's been building the settlement around it. Mara sat with that for a while. Damien, who had called her ordinary, had never once mentioned that he knew about her inheritance. He'd let her believe he saw nothing in her worth wanting, while quietly consulting lawyers about how much of her inheritance he could claim. She filed for divorce that afternoon. Her attorney moved fast. The second thing, a woman named Petra Holt called the Literacy Center and asked for Mara by name. When Mara took the call, Petra said she was a federal investigator working a financial crimes case that touched several organizations connected to the Voss family. She asked if Mara would be willing to speak with her informally, no pressure, just a conversation. She gave a case number and a direct line. It said Mara should call only from a personal device, not the center's phone. Mara wrote down the number. She didn't call yet, but she kept it. The third thing happened on a Wednesday evening when Mara was walking back to Nadia's apartment from the corner store 2 blocks away. She was on the phone with Nadia, telling her to get more coffee because they were out, when a car she didn't recognize slowed on the street beside her. The passenger window came down. She couldn't see the driver clearly. The car stayed even with her for almost half a block before accelerating away when a delivery truck turned the corner. Maybe it was nothing. People slowed on that street because there was a merge issue at the intersection. Maybe it wasn't nothing. Mara called Julian that night. "I'm ready," she said. "I'll send someone in the morning," he said. "Julian," she hesitated. "How secure is the Aurelia?" A pause. "Very. Why, I'll explain in the morning," she said. She packed her things. It didn't take long. She'd brought so little from the penthouse and told Nadia where she was going and watched Nadia open her mouth to argue and then close it again, because Nadia had read the divorce documents and had seen the clause in paragraph 9 and understood, as Mara now understood, that this was no longer a situation that fit inside the dimensions of a sister's apartment in Eastlake. "Call me every day," Nadia said. "Every day," Mara agreed. Nadia grabbed her arm as she reached the door. "Hey." Mara looked back. "He called you ordinary." Nadia's jaw was tight. "Look where ordinary got him." Mara almost smiled. "I'll let you know how it goes." The car that arrived in the morning was black and quiet, and the driver didn't ask questions. Julian met her at the dock himself, which she hadn't expected. He was taller than she'd registered, the first time mid-40s, she thought, with the kind of stillness that reads either as patience or as someone who's learned to conserve energy for things that actually require it. He was wearing a jacket that had been washed too many times, and a watch that had probably cost what her old car was worth. And he looked at her overnight bag and her second bag, the one with the rebinding supplies, because she'd brought work, and he didn't comment on either. "Welcome aboard," he said. "I'll show you your quarters first. Then, whenever you're ready, I'd like to go through the foundation documents." "Now," Mara said, "we can do it now." He looked at her once, measuring. "All right," he said. She stepped aboard the Aurelia and felt the very slight give of the deck beneath her feet, the tiny negotiation between the vessel and the water, and she thought, this is what it feels like when the ground isn't solid, but you're standing on it anyway. She'd been standing on unstable ground for years. She just hadn't known she'd been choosing it. The conference room below deck was nothing like what she'd imagined. It was functional long table, good chairs, windows that were porthole-shaped but larger than standard, a whiteboard on one wall with something written in marker that Julian erased before she could read it. There were stacks of folders on the table, organized but not fussy, with handwritten tabs and a small script that she would later learn was Julian's. She sat down. He sat across from her and opened the first folder. "Your grandfather," he said, "spent the last 8 years of his life making this impossible for anyone to take from you without your consent. Every structure, every entity, every layered holding was built specifically so that control had to be exercised personally. It cannot be inherited by a spouse. It cannot not be claimed through a marital settlement. It cannot be diluted without your signature." Mara looked at him. "He knew I'd need it protected. He knew," Julian said carefully, "that the kind of person who waits until they need something is the kind of person who will eventually face someone who's been watching them wait." She thought about paragraph 9 of the divorce settlement. "Walk me through it," she said. He did. It took 3 hours and 2 breaks, and one moment where Mara asked him to stop and just give her 60 seconds, which he did, without looking at his watch or filling the silence, and she appreciated that more than she would ever tell him. The foundation was not what she'd imagined. She'd thought of it as her grandfather's money, an inheritance, something static. What it actually was a network. Shipping contracts with 4 West Coast ports, investment positions in 11 companies, 2 of which she recognized from business news and 2 of which she'd never heard of, and which Julian described simply as strategic. Offshore accounts in 3 jurisdictions, and most significantly, a data archive records, correspondence, contracts, financial documentation accumulated over 40 years that her grandfather had maintained with what Julian called unusual thoroughness. "How unusual?" Mara asked. Julian chose his words carefully. He kept records of agreements that other parties would have preferred not to be documented. He believed that the Foundation's long-term survival depended on never being in a position where someone had more information than he did. He had leverage, Mara said. He had insurance, Julian said. He never used it. He just made sure people knew it existed. Mara sat back, and now I have it, yes, and people know I have it. Some people, Julian said, have been paying very close attention since your grandfather died, including, she said slowly, whoever sent that car. Julian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, some recalibration. What car? She told him about Wednesday evening. The slow pass, the window, the delivery truck that had made it accelerate. Julian closed the folder in front of him. Tell me, Mara said, who Victor Kessler is. The name landed. She'd found it in a single line of the foundation documents, a reference to a contract dispute, 8 years ago, resolved in her grandfather's favor. She'd pulled the name out of instinct, some echo of her grandfather's own thoroughness, and looked it up on her phone during the second break. And what she'd found had been interesting enough that she'd written the name on the inside of her wrist so she wouldn't lose it. Julian looked at her for a moment. You did your homework. I had 60 seconds, she said. I used them. He almost smiled. It didn't quite land, but it was close. Victor Kessler, he said, is a financier who operates in the same circles as the Voss organization. He and your grandfather had a conflict over a shipping contract in Puget Sound. Your grandfather won. Kessler does not handle losing well, and he has a long memory. He paused. He's been building a position against Damien Voss's organization for about 18 months. The problem is that some of what he needs, some of the leverage he's looking for, is inside this foundation's archive. Mara's hands were very still on the table. He doesn't want me, she said. He wants what my grandfather kept. He wants what your grandfather kept, Julian agreed. And he wants to make sure you don't use it against him first. What's in there? She asked. What specifically? Records of a wire transfer structure that Kessler used in 2019. If those records reach federal investigators, it ends his entire financial operation. Julian paused. Federal investigators who are incidentally already looking. Petra Holt's case number surfaced in her mind. She filed it away. And Damien? She asked. Where does Damien fit into this? Julian's pause, this time was different, carefully weighted. Serena Vale, he said, has been employed by Victor Kessler's organization for approximately 3 years. The room didn't change. The light was the same. The table was the same. Mara's hands were the same hands. She was planted, Mara said. We believe so, yes, in Damien's organization.
Yes.
To get information about Damien's finances. She stopped. And about me. And about what I might inherit. Julian didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Mara thought about the penthouse. She thought about the woman on the arm of the couch with her ankles crossed. She thought about Ordinary. She thought about how the humiliation she'd swallowed the rain, the overnight bag, the elevator, the bench outside the closed coffee shop, might have been something someone designed, not spontaneous cruelty, engineered, but Damien still said the word. Damien still made the choice. Whatever Serena had arranged, whatever Kessler had planned, Damien had looked at his pregnant wife and said the word himself. That distinction mattered. She was going to need to hold on to it for a while, to figure out exactly how, but it mattered. I want to see the archive, she said. It'll take several days to... I'll start today. Whatever you can pull up today. She met Julian's eyes. My grandfather built something here. I spent 3 years pretending I didn't want it, because wanting it felt like admitting I needed more than what I had. She stopped. I needed more than what I had, and now I have it. So let's start. Julian reached across the table and opened the second folder. Outside through the porthole-shaped windows, the Seattle harbor moved in its constant, unhurried way. Water against hull, gulls in the gray sky. Somewhere on shore, the city was going about its business, the coffee shops and the traffic, and the ordinary human machinery of a Thursday in October. And aboard the Aurelia, in a conference room below deck, the woman Damien Voss had called Ordinary, began reading the documents that would take the floor out from under every man who had underestimated her. She hadn't chosen this life, but she was done choosing less than it. The first folder took 4 hours. Not because the documents were complicated, though they were, but because Mara read everything twice. Julian had learned this about her. By the second hour, she didn't skim, didn't assume, didn't take his summaries as substitutes for the source material. She read the original text, and then she asked questions. And the questions were not the kind people asked when they were trying to appear informed. They were the kind people asked when they were genuinely trying to understand the structure of a thing, the bones of it, how it held together, and where it would crack under pressure. By the time they reached the third folder, Julian had stopped offering summaries entirely. He just opened the next document and waited. It was past 8 in the evening when Mara set down the last page and pressed both palms flat against the table and exhaled. The wire transfer records, she said. The ones that expose Kessler. Where are they in the archive? Secured partition. Separate server. Your grandfather encrypted them under a key that requires biometric authorization originally. His estate attorney transferred the authorization protocol to you 6 months after his death. Julian paused. You would have received a notification. I deleted it, she said. I know, without reading it. I know that too. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them made it into a thing. So I can access them, she said. Yes, when you're ready. What happens when I access them? Julian folded his hands on the table. The access triggers a timestamp in the system. Anyone monitoring the Foundation's security architecture would know the partition had been opened, and Kessler is monitoring. Almost certainly. Mara pulled her coat tighter. The ship moved in a way you felt more than heard a slow breathing adjustment against the water. She was tired in the particular way that came from using your brain at full capacity for hours, whilst also carrying 8 months of pregnancy in your body. A specific kind of exhaustion that pooled in your lower back and behind your eyes simultaneously. If I access the records, she said, Kessler knows I've seen them. Yes. And that makes me a problem he has to solve. You're already a problem he has to solve, Julian said. The access would tell him you understand what you have. She thought about the car on Wednesday, the slow pass, the window that had come down. He already knows I don't know what I have, she said slowly. He's been watching me walk around for 3 years, being completely unaware that I inherited anything worth protecting. He's been patient because he was waiting for me to either take in control or let the Foundation dissolve through inaction. Julian nodded. And then I called you, she said. And now he knows I'm here. He knew within 12 hours of your first call. Mara absorbed this. So the question, she said, isn't whether to access the records. The question is what I do after. That, Julian said, is the question your grandfather spent 10 years trying to answer. She picked up the folder again. Not to read it, she'd read it. She just needed something in her hands. Tell me about Serena Vale, she said. Not what she is to Kessler, what she actually is. Who she was before. Julian was quiet for a moment. Why? Because I spent 2 years watching her in rooms where I felt like I didn't belong, and I'd like to understand what I was actually looking at. Julian reached for a different folder, thinner, worn at the edges, the kind that had been handled more than the others. He opened it to the second page. Serena Vale, born Serena Vallejo Fresno, California. Financial crimes background, she was recruited by Kessler's organization approximately 3 years ago after spending 2 years working in private banking in San Francisco. She's intelligent, she's patient. She has a particular skill for identifying the dynamics inside a relationship and finding the pressure point. He paused. She didn't create the problems between you and Damien. She found the ones that already existed and applied weight to them. Mara's chest felt tight. He already thought I was ordinary, she said. It wasn't a question. He already had doubts about what your life looked like next to his. Julian said. He didn't try to soften it. Serena confirmed what he was already afraid was true. The tightness in her chest resolved into something colder and more stable. Not grief. More like clarity, which sometimes felt identical to grief in the first few seconds. All right, she said. She closed the folder. I want to sleep, and tomorrow I want to see the archive. Julian stood. I'll have someone show you to your quarters. Julian. He stopped. My grandfather trusted you, she said. He trusted you enough to leave you managing this for 2 years while you waited for me to be ready. I need to know why. Julian stood very still for a moment. He said I was the only person in his orbit who had ever told him he was wrong about something and been right. He paused. He said that was a rare quality, and he wasn't going to waste it. Mara looked at him. Were you right about the thing? Yes, Julian said simply. Okay, she said. Good night. She slept better than she had any right to, which she attributed to the motion of the water, which was the environmental variable that had ever been able to pull her brain offline without a fight. She woke at 5:15, before any light, and lay in the narrow berth with her hand on her stomach and thought about Damien. Not the Damien of the penthouse, with his jacket still on and Serena on the arm of the couch. The earlier Damien. The one she'd married, which meant the one she'd believed in hard enough to build a life around. She was going to have to separate those things, the real from the constructed, what he'd actually been from what she'd needed him to be, and she couldn't do it yet, not fully, because she was 8 months pregnant with his daughter, and the body has its own timeline for certain kinds of grief. But she started the work of it, lying there in the dark with the water moving under her, because the alternative was letting it calcify into something she'd carry wrong. He had been capable of warmth. That was real. He had also been capable of cruelty in the specific form of omission, of never quite saying the unkind thing, but making sure you felt the shape of it anyway. She'd called it restraint for a long time. She'd called it his upbringing, his world, the particular emotional grammar of men who grew up inside money and power. She'd built excuses with the precision of someone who needed the thing they were excusing to survive. She didn't need him to survive. She knew that now. She got up, made coffee in the small kitchen down the hall, stood at the porthole window with the cup in both hands and watched the harbor come awake. The first light on the water, the cranes in the port, the slow movement of an early freight vessel clearing the channel. Ordinary. She turned the word over in her mind. She'd spent the night letting it settle into its full weight, and now she was ready to put it down. Whatever she was or wasn't, that word was never going to be the measure again. She was in the archive by 7:30. The room was smaller than she'd expected, a dedicated server station, climate-controlled,
with a monitor
and a chair and very little else. Julian's had set it up before she arrived. There was coffee on the side table that was still hot, and a legal pad with a fresh pen, and nothing else. He understood she needed space to work without the pressure of being watched. The biometric authorization took 40 seconds. She pressed her palm to the scanner and said her full name and waited, and then the partition opened. Her grandfather's handwriting was on the oldest documents, scanned copies of physical records. His particular neat script with its old-fashioned letter forms, dates going back to 2009. But the relevant material was more recent and more clinical: account numbers, transaction records, a chain of wire transfers across 4 entities that were technically separate and actually one. Dr. Kessler's structure. She read for 2 hours without stopping. By the time she surfaced, she understood 3 things. First, her grandfather had not just kept records. He had understood exactly what Kessler was doing and had documented it in a form that was specifically designed to be used as evidence. This was not passive record keeping. This was preparation. Second, the structure Kessler had built in 2019 was still active. Whatever he'd told himself about the risk of exposure, he'd decided the Foundation's inaction was protection enough. He'd been waiting for the inheritance to time out, for Mara to never take control, for the archive to become inaccessible through institutional neglect. Third, one of the 11 companies in the Foundation's investment portfolio, one of the ones Julian had described simply as strategic, was a minority stakeholder in a Kessler-adjacent shipping entity. Her grandfather had bought in deliberately. He hadn't just documented Kessler's structure. He'd embedded himself inside its edges, quietly, where it couldn't be seen, without knowing exactly where to look. Her grandfather had been playing a long game. She had just inherited the board. She was on her second cup of coffee, staring at the monitor and making notes on the legal pad, when Julian knocked and opened the door. His expression was contained, but she had already learned that Julian Mercer's version of urgency was a very specific stillness. "Damien Voss is at the dock," he said. She set down the pen. "How did he know I was here?" he says Nadia told him. Something shifted in her stomach that wasn't the baby. Nadia wouldn't. He says she didn't tell him willingly. Julian paused. He says he went to her apartment this morning, and she made a mistake under pressure. Mara was already on her feet. Julian raised one hand. He came alone. No one from his organization. He says he just wants to talk. "Of course he does," she said. She took a breath. The baby shifted, that slow roll she'd come to recognize as equilibrium-seeking. As if even in utero her daughter could feel the change in her mother's body temperature and was adjusting. "Let him come aboard," she said. "Mara, let him come. I want to see his face." Julian looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I'll be outside the door." "You'll be inside the door," she said. "I want a witness." Damien looked like he hadn't slept. She registered this not with satisfaction, though some part of her noted it, but with the particular attention of someone gathering data. He was wearing a coat she recognized, a gray wool overcoat he'd had for years, and he hadn't shaved, and his eyes, when he found hers across the conference room, were doing something complicated that she couldn't entirely name. He looked at her whole self, belly, and posture, and the legal pad in her hand, and the pen still in her fingers, and something crossed his face that she also couldn't name. "You look," he started. "Don't," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She didn't. Julian stood at the door. Damien glanced at him once, and Julian looked back at him with an expression that communicated exactly nothing, which was its own kind of communication. "How did you find out about this place?" Mara asked. "I've always known about the Aurelia," Damien said. "Your grandfather hosted a maritime fundraiser here years ago. It's not a secret vessel, but you didn't know I was here. Not until this morning and Nadia." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I went to her building. She was coming out. I asked her if you were okay, and she said you were somewhere safe. And I pushed. You pushed, Mara said flatly. I was worried about you. You were worried about what I might do with what I have, she said. There's a difference. Damien was quiet. I know about paragraph 9, she said. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he said that was my lawyer's. Don't. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. You went to a lawyer before you told me you wanted to end the marriage. You had them build a settlement structure around an inheritance you never told me you knew about. You sat in that penthouse and called me ordinary, while your attorney was already calculating what percentage of my grandfather's estate you could claim. She stopped. So when you say you were worried about me, I need you to be very clear about what you were actually worried about. The silence was long enough that it had a shape. I was wrong, Damien said. About a lot of things. That's not what I asked. Mara, were you worried about me? Or were you worried about losing access to what I have? He looked at his hands. She watched him make the decision, could almost see him choosing between the comfortable version and the true one. Both, he said. I know that's honest, she said. I'll give you that. She pulled out a chair across from him but didn't sit. She stood with her hands on the chair back and looked at him. Tell me what you know about Serena and Victor Kessler, she said. The color left his face in a way that was distinct and immediate, like a light going out. What? He said. Don't, she said again. Not today. I've spent 14 hours reading documents, and I don't have the energy for the part where you pretend you don't understand the question. Damien's jaw worked. He looked at Julian. Julian looked back at him with the same expressive nothing. I knew Kessler had people inside various organizations, Damien said carefully. I had reasons to suspect that Serena had a prior relationship with his network, and you kept her anyway. I didn't want to believe it, because you wanted her. He didn't answer. Because she made you believe you were the man you'd always wanted to be, and I made you feel like the man you actually were, Mara said. And the second one is less comfortable. Something broke open in his expression. She wasn't glad to see it. She wasn't sorry either. She just noted it. What's she feeding him? Mara asked. What does she have on your operation that she's been passing to Kessler? Damien's head came up. How do you? Because I've been reading for 14 hours and I understand now how your organization overlaps with Kessler's financial structure, and I need to know how much she's already given him, so I know what he thinks he has. She pulled the chair out and finally sat, across from him, eye level. Talk to me, Damien, not to your lawyer, not to your people, to me right now. He sat with it for a long moment. She could see it moving through him, the calculation, the resistance, the thing underneath the resistance that was something rawer. The port contracts, he said finally. She has documentation on the port contracts and the offshore account structure. Maybe 14 months of transaction records. Does she have access to your current accounts or just historical? I don't know. Best guess. Historical, he said. I changed the account architecture 8 months ago. She wouldn't have the current structure. Why'd you change it? Another pause. Because I started to suspect her. But you didn't end it. No. Why not? He looked at her, and she saw the truth of it before he said anything. Because she'd always been able to read him when he forgot to manage his face. Because I didn't want to be wrong about her, he said. If I admitted she was Kessler's, I had to admit what that meant about how she got close to me. And what I'd done to, he stopped. What you'd done to us, Mara said. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Mara was quiet for a moment. She thought about her grandfather's documents, the care embedded in them. The long patience of a man who had understood that the things you built in private were the only things that couldn't be taken from you in public. I'm cooperating with federal investigators, she said. I'm going to give them the archive. Not just Kessler's wire transfer records the full picture, which means everything that touches your organization is going to be in front of people who are paid to find things. Damien said nothing. She watched him process the size of it. You should get a lawyer, she said. Not the one who wrote paragraph 9, a real one. Mara, I'm not doing this to hurt you, she said. I'm doing it because it's what needs to happen. But I'm telling you now, in advance, because you're going to be the father of my daughter, and I'd rather you make good choices than bad ones. He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she felt the weight of everything they'd been the good parts, which had been real, and the broken parts, which had also been real, and the 2.5 years of her life that couldn't be returned, but also couldn't be erased. I didn't know what you were capable of, he said quietly. That's not an excuse. It's just I didn't see it. I know, she said. That was your mistake. She stood. You should go. And don't go back to Serena's apartment tonight. Wherever you've been sleeping, it's not a safe location anymore. And you know why. He stood too. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something that would undo or at least complicate the specific shape of how they'd arrived here. She watched him decide not to. At the door he paused. Is she okay? He asked the baby. She's fine, Mara said. She's better than fine. She's about to be born into a completely different situation than the one I thought she'd have. And I think she's going to be all right with that. He nodded. He left. Julian stepped away from the door and came to stand near the table, and for a moment they both just stood there in the wake of it. Petra Holt, Mara said, the federal investigator. Julian said, I'm going to call her today. I want to arrange a meeting. She picked up the legal pad. And I need you to get the Foundation's security team to upgrade the perimeter monitoring on the vessel. Whatever level you're at now, go up. Already in progress, Julian said. She looked at him. You started before I asked. You would have asked, he said simply. She almost smiled. I want to look at the third set of documents this afternoon, the port contracts. I need to understand what Serena actually copied. I'll pull them. She was halfway to the door when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Nadia, she answered. I'm sorry. Nadia's voice was tight and miserable. He was at the door before I even saw him, and he said you'd been hurt, and I said you were fine, you were on the yacht, and She stopped. I'm so sorry, Marsa said. It's handled. He's not there, is he, did he? He was here. He left. He told me some things I needed to know. She paused. Nadia, I need you to go stay somewhere that isn't your apartment for a few days. Why? Because the person who put Serena in Damien's life knows I'm here now, and they know Damien came to see me, and they're going to want to know what he said. A long silence on the line. How bad is this? Nadia asked. Mara looked out the porthole at the harbor, the gray water, the pale October sky, the cranes of the port standing against it like enormous patient animals. It's manageable, she said, but it's not small. Mara, I know, pack a bag. Call me when you're somewhere else. She hung up. Julian was watching her. The access log from this morning, she said, when I opened the partition. You said anyone monitoring the architecture would know. Yes. Has there been any unusual activity on the Foundation's network since I accessed it? Julian crossed to the monitor in the corner of the conference room. She hadn't noticed the monitor before. Or rather, she'd noticed it without cataloging it and typed something. He looked at the screen for a moment. When he turned back, that specific stillness had returned to his face. 3 probe attempts, he said, external, in the last 4 hours. Kessler, she said. Almost certainly. He's not waiting anymore, she said. He knows I've seen the records. He knows I'm cooperating with investigators. And he knows Damien came here and told me something. Yes. Which means he's going to move. Yes. She stood in the center of the conference room with her legal pad in her hand and thought about the car on Wednesday evening. The window. The half a block of keeping pace. The patience of it. She thought about her grandfather sitting in this same vessel, or another one like it, 40 years ago, building something in private that nobody would be able to take in public. She thought about her daughter, who was going to be born in approximately 3 weeks, and about the world she was going to enter, and about the kind of mother she intended to be, not a perfect one, not an untouchable one, but a clear-eyed one. Julian, she said. Yes, call Petra Holt. Don't wait for me to do it. Use the Foundation's secure line and set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. She paused. And I want the ship moved. He looked at her. Moved where? Somewhere that isn't where it was when Damien told us he'd been here. She met Julian's eyes. If Kessler's already probing the network, he's already looking at the vessel's location. I want to make him work for it. Julian nodded once. He picked up his phone. Mara went back to the archive room, sat down in front of the monitor, and opened the next file. Outside below the waterline, she could already feel the engines beginning to change a low vibration, almost inaudible, the ship preparing to move from the position it had held since morning into something unknown, somewhere forward, somewhere that couldn't be watched from the same point on shore. She put her hand briefly on her stomach. Her daughter rolled, slow and certain, like she already understood that the ground was always moving, and the only thing you could do was learn to stand on it anyway. Mara turned back to the screen and kept reading, and did not look back toward the dock where Damien had stood, because looking back was the one thing she had already decided she could not afford. The meeting with Petra Holt was set for 9 in the morning. At 8:53, Julian came to the archive room and told Mara that Petra Holt was dead. Mara looked up from the monitor. She looked at Julian's face and read the stillness there not the contained professional stillness she'd learned to parse over the past 2 days, but something tighter, something with an edge in it. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. More like the verbal equivalent of bracing. "Car accident. Last night, 11:40 p.m. on the I-5 northbound. Single vehicle." Julian paused. Her case files were not recovered from the scene. Mara set down the pen. She thought about Petra Holt's voice on the phone, direct, measured, the voice of someone who had been doing careful work in careful increments. She thought about the case number Petra had given her, the instruction to call only from a personal device. She thought about the 3 probe attempts on the Foundation's network, 4 hours ago. "It wasn't an accident," she said. "No," Julian said, "it wasn't." The room felt smaller suddenly. Not physically, the dimensions hadn't changed. The server hummed at the same pitch. The climate control pushed the same recycled air. But the space had contracted around her in the way spaces do when the parameters of a situation shift from dangerous to something without a clean name. Who else inside the federal investigation would have known? "Holt was meeting with me," she asked. "I don't know." "Guess." Julian sat down across from her the first time he'd sat in the archive room. That alone told her something. Holt worked a small unit. 3 investigators, 1 supervising attorney. If Kessler has someone inside the unit, he does, Mara said. Obviously, he does. The timing is not a coincidence. She stood up because she couldn't sit anymore, the baby pressing against her diaphragm in a way that made sitting feel like compression. She walked to the small porthole and looked at the water. They'd moved the ship last night. They were anchored further from the main harbor now, in a position Julian had less readable from shore. She'd taken him at his word. Who knew about the meeting other than you and me? "I placed the call from the secure line," Julian said. Holt confirmed by encrypted message. The only people who knew were in this room and whoever Holt told. And whoever was watching Holt, Mara said. Silence. "She had the case files with her," Mara said. "That means she was bringing them to us." "That's my read." "Which means Kessler knew she was coming here. Which means he had eyes on her last night, not just on us." She pressed 2 fingers against her temple. Her head hurt with the specific ache of not enough sleep, compounded by too much information processed too fast. If the files are gone, what does that mean for the investigation? It sets it back significantly. Julian's voice was careful. Holt was the case architect. Without her and without the physical files, any replacement investigators starts from partial documentation. How partial? "I don't know what was in those files versus what's stored digitally. I don't know how much redundancy she built in." He paused. "What I do know is that Kessler now believes the federal threat has been neutralized, which means his next move is us." Mara turned from the porthole. "He's going to come for the archive," she said. "Yes. How long do we have?" "If he moved on Holt last night, he's already repositioning. A day. Maybe less." She looked at the monitor. The archive was open pages and pages of her grandfather's meticulous documentation, 40 years of careful watching. All of it now the single most dangerous asset on the West Coast. "I need to make copies," she said. "Not digital, physical. Multiple sets in multiple locations, with people who aren't connected to this vessel." Julian was already on his feet. "I'll arrange it. And I need a lawyer who isn't connected to Damien's network or the Foundation's existing legal team." She was thinking fast now, the exhaustion burning off under something that was starting to feel like controlled fury. Someone federal. Someone who can receive the archive directly and establish protected disclosure. "I know someone," Julian said. "She's in Portland. Call her." He was at the door, Julian. He stopped. "Petra Holt had a family?" "A husband," he said. 2 kids. Mara nodded. She turned back to the monitor. "Call your contact in Portland." He left. She stood alone in the archive room for 30 seconds, which was as long as she allowed herself. She pressed her palm flat against the server unit, a strange impulse, almost proprietary, like laying a hand on something that needed to know it was still being protected. Then she sat down and kept working. The copies took 6 hours. Julian had a printer set up in the vessel's secondary operations room that she hadn't known about, and they worked in parallel, Julian pulling documents from the archive in batches, while Mara reviewed each batch for completeness before it was printed, because she didn't trust any process she hadn't personally verified. By 2 in the afternoon, they had 3 full physical sets, each in a separate sealed case. The Portland attorney, a woman named Christine Mao, who spoke in precise sentences with 0 decorative language, and who Julian clearly trusted in the way you trust someone who has never once been wrong about anything important, received the first set by secure courier at 4 p.m. Mara spoke to her by phone at 4:30. I want to understand the disclosure structure, Christine said, on a call that Mara took standing at the porthole with Julian 3 feet away. You're providing this voluntarily, as the controlling beneficiary of the Ellison Foundation, and you're prepared to testify to the provenance of the documents. Yes, Mara said. The federal investigation into Kessler's network, you understand this, opens you to deposition, potentially extended engagement with the process. I understand. You're 36 weeks pregnant. I'm aware. A pause that was not hesitation but recalibration. All right. I'll file for protected disclosure status today. That gives the material legal protection and establishes you as a cooperating witness, which has its own protections. What about the gap left by Holt's death? Mara asked. I have a contact at the supervising attorney's level, Christine said. I'll make the call today. It's not seamless. Nothing will be seamless now, but it can be done. And Kessler? When he finds out the disclosure has been filed, he'll know he's lost the archive. Christine's voice was flat. That's when he becomes unpredictable. Mara already knew this. She thanked Christine and ended the call. The third physical set of documents was the one Mara kept. She didn't tell Julian where she put it. Not because she didn't trust him, she trusted him more than anyone else currently aboard this vessel, but because she'd read enough of her grandfather's documents to understand that even the people you trusted needed to not know certain things, because if they didn't know, they couldn't be forced to reveal it. She wrapped the case in a dry bag and placed it somewhere on the vessel that required a specific route to access. Then she went back to the conference room, sat down, and thought about Damien. She told him to get a lawyer, a real one. She needed to know if he'd done it. She also needed to know something else, something that had been sitting at the edge of her thinking. Since Julian had described Serena's background, since Damien had sat across from her and said he'd suspected Serena's connection to Kessler for 8 months and hadn't ended it, she called Damien's cell directly. He answered in 2 rings, which meant he'd been holding the phone. Are you somewhere safe? She asked. Hotel, he said. Different name on the booking. Smart. Did you call a lawyer? Marcus Webb. I don't know him. Is he clean? As clean as they come in this world. A pause. Mara. I heard about Holt. How? My people have sources inside the state police. Single vehicle crash, controlled road, weather was clear. His voice was doing something she recognized, the tight, processed tone of someone managing their own fear by talking around it. That's not an accident. No, she said, it's not. Kessler's moving. I know, Damien. She stopped. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me without calculating first. Not what the answer should be. What the answer actually is. Silence. Then, okay, Serena, how much does she know about me specifically? Not my finances, not the foundation. Me, my habits, my schedule, the places I go. How much did you tell her? The pause was 2 seconds too long. Damien, more than I should have, he said. He said it quietly, which was worse than if he'd said it defensively. She was good at asking about you in ways that sounded like she was interested in you as a person. She'd ask how your program was going, whether you were sleeping okay at the end of the pregnancy, where you liked to take walks. I thought. He stopped. You thought she was asking because she liked me, Mara said. I thought she was trying to accept the situation. She was building a profile, Mara said. She knew eventually I'd take control of the foundation, and she needed to know how I moved. She pressed 2 fingers against her lips for a moment, thinking, she knows about the literacy center. She knows my walking routes around Eastlake. She knows my sister's name and probably her address. Yes, Damien said. It cost him. I need to know if she has access to your location right now, Mara said. If she knows you're in a hotel, if she knows what name. She doesn't. I used an alias she's never heard. I'm the only one who knows where I am. Keep it that way. She paused. Damien, I need something from you. Not as my husband, we're past that. As the father of my daughter, who I am choosing to still believe has the capacity to do the right thing when it's actually required. What do you need? I need you to testify, she said. Not to what you know about Kessler's network, specifically Christine Mao's disclosure covers that through the archive. I need you to testify about Serena, about what she asked, what she was given access to, what she saw inside your organization. I need her on the record. A long silence. That ends everything, Damien said. My operation, whatever's left of it. My people. Everything. Yes, Mara said. That's what it means. And you're asking me to do it anyway. I'm telling you it's the right thing. Whether you do it is your decision. Another silence, longer than the first. Call Marcus Webb, she said. Tell him I said to reach out to Christine Mao in Portland. They'll coordinate. She ended the call. She sat in the conference room and breathed. The ship moved in its small, constant way, and she let the motion work on her, The way she'd started to let it work on her like a hand on the back, steady and impersonal, and somehow exactly enough. Then Julian came in, and he was not moving with his usual economy. He was moving fast. "We have a problem," he said. She looked at his face. "What?" He put a tablet on the table in front of her. On the screen was a photograph, grainy, time-stamped from 40 minutes ago. It showed a woman leaving a building. Mara recognized the Eastlake building, where Nadia's apartment was, even though Nadia was supposed to be somewhere else, somewhere safe. The woman was Serena. Mara's stomach dropped. "Where is Nadia right now?" Julian asked. His voice was careful the way you're careful with someone who is standing close to an edge. Mara was already calling. The phone rang 4 times. 5-6. Nadia picked up on the 7th. "Hey, where are you?" Mara said. "Right now. What room? What building?" "I'm Mara. What, Nadia? Listen to me. Where are you?" "I'm at Lena's place. I've been here since this morning." "Why are you? Did you go back to your apartment? At any point today?" A pause. A very specific kind of pause. The kind that precedes an answer you know is wrong before you give it. "I went to get my laptop," Nadia said. "Just for an hour." "I didn't think. Was anyone there when you arrived? Or when you left?" "No. Nobody. The building was quiet." Another pause. "Mara, you're scaring me. I know. Stay at Lena's. Don't go back to your apartment. Don't tell anyone where Lena lives. I'll call you in an hour." She hung up. She looked at Julian. Serena went to Nadia's building. "She was there for 11 minutes, Julian said, based on the timestamp. 11 minutes is enough to put something in an apartment. She stood up. Nadia went back for her laptop. Nadia told me she went for an hour. She was thinking out loud, moving around the table. Serena didn't go to find Nadia. Nadia was a secondary target. Serena went to plant something. A device. She knew from Damien that Nadia's apartment was where I'd been staying. "Which means she's still building a surveillance perimeter around you," Julian said. "Or she went there, because she already knows I'm not there anymore, and she wanted to see if Nadia had any documents, any information." Mara stopped. "Does Nadia have anything connected to the Foundation?" "Only what you might have told her. Nothing in writing. Nothing on paper." She exhaled. "Okay. That's okay." She pressed her hand flat on the table. "But Serena's active. She's not waiting for Kessler's instruction. She's running her own intelligence operation right now, which means she's closer to us than we thought." "There's something else," Julian said. Something in his voice made her go still. He reached across and scrolled the tablet to a second image. This one was sharper, a screenshot from what looked like a security feed. It showed a marina, not their current anchor point, the main harbor where the Aurelia had been docked until last night. Standing on the dock, looking at the empty berth where the yacht had been, was Serena, and beside her, slightly behind, was a man Mara had never seen. Late 50s, heavy build, watching the water with the patient attention of someone who was very accustomed to waiting. Julian touched the screen. "Victor Kessler," he said. He was here. Not in an office, not behind layers of organization. He was standing on the dock himself, looking at the space where her ship had been. Mara looked at the image for a long time. She thought about her grandfather, who had spent 40 years building something in careful silence, who had understood that the only protection you could trust was the kind you built before you needed it. She thought about the way he'd bought a minority stake in a Kessler-adjacent shipping company, not because he needed the investment, but because he needed a position inside the enemy's architecture that nobody could see without knowing exactly where to look. She looked at the man on the dock. He'd killed Petra Holt. He'd had case files destroyed. He'd sent Serena to a pregnant woman's sister's apartment to plant surveillance equipment. He was standing on a public dock in broad daylight, looking at the empty space where her ship had been, and his expression in the grainy security image was not angry. He looked patient. That was the most frightening thing. The patience. "Julian," she said. "The Foundation's minority stake in the Puget Sound shipping entity." "Yes, Kessler's entity. The one my grandfather bought into." "Yes. What rights does a minority stakeholder have under the entity's operating agreement?" Julian looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but the particular quality of attention you give when someone in front of you makes a move you hadn't anticipated. "Access to operational records," he said slowly, "by contractual right, including scheduling, cargo manifests, and port access logs," Mara said. "Yes." "Which would include vessel movement tracking for any ship using those port facilities." Julian was very still. "Kessler uses those ports," Mara said, "for his network. He's been using facilities that my grandfather had stakeholder access to for the past 10 years. She looked at Julian. He's been moving things through ports where we have the right to see every manifest. Julian sat down, this time heavily. Your grandfather knew, he said. My grandfather built it that way, Mara said. The archive isn't just documents, he observed. Some of it is records he had a legal right to access. Which means when we disclose to Christine Mao, we're not just providing witness documentation, we're providing legally obtained operational records from inside Kessler's own infrastructure. Julian put his hand over his mouth for a moment. He was not a man given to visible reactions, and this small gesture cost him something. He spent 10 years, Julian said quietly, building a legal pipeline into the man's own operation. And then he left it to me, Mara said, because he knew eventually someone would push me hard enough that I'd come get it. The water moved. The ship adjusted. Somewhere above deck, one of Julian's security team crossed the deck in the direction of the stern. Mara looked at the image on the tablet. Kessler on the dock. Serena's beside him. Both of them looking at the empty water where she should have been. She thought about what it meant to have been underestimated by this many people for this many years. She thought about Damien saying she was ordinary, with the flat certainty of a man who had looked at her life and seen only its visible surface. She thought about Serena, asking careful questions about her walking routes and her sleeping patterns, and her sister's name. She thought about her daughter, who was going to be born in roughly 3 weeks, who was going to enter a world that Mars was currently trying to make less dangerous one legal document at a time. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, unknown number. She almost let it go, she answered, Miss Ellison. A man's voice. Low, unhurried, with a particular quality of precision, every word placed deliberately, the way people spoke when they'd thought about exactly what they wanted to say, and had decided on the minimum necessary. She knew before he said anything else. Mr. Kessler, she said. A pause that was almost appreciative. You're quick. I had a good picture of you, she said. Harbor security camera. You really shouldn't stand on public docks. I wanted you to know I was here, he said. That's why I stood there. Her free hand was flat on the table. Her other hand was holding the phone with a steadiness she was consciously manufacturing. What do you want? She said. I want to have an honest conversation, he said. One that's been necessary for several years, and that your grandfather unfortunately made impossible. My grandfather is dead, she said. So whatever argument you had with him, I'd suggest you let it go. The argument, Kessler said, involves documentation that belongs to me. Operational records that your grandfather accessed through a stakeholder arrangement that was at best a manipulation of the entity's operating agreement, and, at worst, a form of corporate espionage. I'd like those records returned. They're legally accessed records, Mara said. You can dispute the stakeholder arrangement in court. I'd prefer not to involve courts, he said. I think you understand why. Because courts would expose your network. Because courts are slow and expensive, and I think we both prefer solutions that don't require either of us to spend 3 years in deposition. He paused. I'm prepared to make this very simple for you, Ms. Ellison. The foundation retains its assets. Your philanthropic work continues. Your daughter is born into a safe and comfortable life. All I need is the archive. Mara looked at Julian. Julian was looking at her. You killed Petra Holt, she said. The silence was 1 second long. That was a regrettable. She had 2 kids, Mara said. She had a husband. She was doing careful work, and you killed her because she was close to you. And I need you to hear me very clearly right now when I tell you that whatever you think this conversation is, it is not a negotiation. Another silence. Longer. When Kessler spoke again, the precision was still there, but the patience had shifted. Not gone, just Ellison. He said, You are 36 weeks pregnant. You are aboard a vessel with a limited security team, in a harbor that I know better than your chairman does. I have been patient with your family for a very long time. I am asking you, as directly as I know how, to make the correct choice. Mara looked at the tablet on the table. Kessler on the dock. The empty berth, his patience. Here is what's going to happen, she said. I'm going to hang up this phone. The archive is already in the hands of a protected disclosure attorney in Portland, and has been for the past 3 hours. 2 additional physical copies exist in locations that are not this vessel. Whatever you do to me or this ship, the material is already beyond your reach. She heard his breathing change, very slightly. Not a gasp. Just a shift. You should have moved faster, she said. That was your mistake. She ended the call. Her hand was shaking. She set the phone on the table and looked at it and let the shaking happen, because fighting it would cost energy she didn't have. Julian said, Are you all right? No, she said, but it doesn't matter right now. She picked up the phone again. Get Christine Mao on the line. Tell her Kessler made direct contact and made an implied threat. I want that documented. She stood, and get the security team together. All of them. I need to know every access point on this vessel, and I need to know it in the next 20 minutes. She was already moving toward the door. Mara. Julian's voice stopped her. She turned. He knows the archive is gone, Julian said, which means the only remaining leverage he has is me, she said. I know. She looked at Julian's face, the controlled concern there, the thing he was doing with his jaw that was the closest she'd seen him come to open fear. She said, again, get the team. She walked out of the conference room and into the narrow corridor and put one hand on the wall and stood there for a moment. Just stood there. Because her daughter had chosen this particular moment to push hard against her ribs with what felt like a foot, and the sensation was so specific and so was alive that it cut through everything, the fear, the calculation, the controlled fury, and left her, for just that moment, with something that had no strategic value whatsoever. She was terrified. Not for herself. For this person inside her who hadn't chosen any of this, who was 3 weeks from being born into whatever world Mara managed to build by then, who deserved a mother who was still standing when that moment came. She put her hand on her stomach. I know, she said quietly, to no one, to her daughter, to the particular darkness of a ship's corridor, with the water moving under everything. I know. We're almost there. Then she took her hand off the wall, straightened her spine, and walked toward the deck where Julian's security team was already beginning to assemble. Because the woman Victor Kessler had called on the phone was not the woman she intended to still be by the time this was over. And the only way to become that other woman was to keep moving through this one. The security team was 4 people. Mara had assumed more. She'd built a number in her head, 8, 10, the kind of presence that filled a room, and the reality of 4 felt like a door coming off its hinges. She stood on the deck in the gray October afternoon and looked at them, 2 men and 2 women, compact and capable-looking, each of them carrying themselves with the specific economy of people who'd been trained to conserve motion until motion was necessary. Julian introduced them by first name only. She didn't ask for last names. It didn't feel like the moment. Tell me the access points, she said. The team leader, a woman named Rose, short dark hair, a scar along her left jawline, that she made no effort to conceal, walked Mara through the vessel's entry points with the brisk efficiency of someone who had already done this assessment and was now reciting it from memory. 3 above-deck access points, 2 below. 1 point at the stern that was technically sealed, but could be breached with the right equipment in under 4 minutes. Can we reinforce the stern point? Mara asked. Already done, Rose said. 20 minutes ago. What about the water approach? Harder to secure completely. We've got passive sonar running, and I've got Day on the water side with eyes on the approach lane. Rose paused. What we don't have is the option to run. If this anchor position gets compromised, we're limited in how fast we can move. How limited? 20 minutes to get engines to speed. More if the harbor master's channel is congested. 20 minutes was a long time. Mara knew this without needing to do the math. What we have in our favor, Rose continued, is that any overt action against a vessel in a regulated harbor carries significant legal exposure. Kessler's been careful for 20 years because he doesn't leave the kind of evidence that lands in front of a jury. He's not going to fire on us. He killed a federal investigator last night, Mara said. Rouse didn't flinch. That was staged as an accident. This would be visible. He wants the archive, and he wants you manageable, not martyred. She paused. That's what protects us right now. That's the thing to hold on to. Mara held on to it. Julian pulled her aside while Rose coordinated the team's positioning. The wind off the water was cold, and she hadn't brought a coat to the deck, and she felt it in her shoulders, in her jaw, in the particular vulnerability of standing outside, at 36 weeks pregnant in an October that had decided to be serious about itself. Christine Mao filed the protected disclosure 40 minutes ago. Julian said quietly, "It's in the system. Time-stamped and attributed. Kessler's people will know. Within the hour, yes. His legal network will flag it. When he finds out the disclosure is filed, what does he do?" Mara asked. "He does the math," Julian said. "The archive is in protected legal hands. Physical copies exist in locations he doesn't know. His access route to the material is closed." He paused. "His remaining leverage is you, your testimony. You're standing as the controlling beneficiary and cooperating witness. He comes after me directly," she said. "Or he tries to make you unwilling to testify," Julian said. "There are several ways to accomplish that." She thought about Nadia. She thought about Damien in his hotel room with an alias on the booking. She thought about her daughter 3 weeks from existing outside her body, currently pressing steadily against her ribs, as if reminding her that the deadline was not only legal. I need Nadia somewhere more secure than Lena's apartment, she said, already working on it. I have a contact safe house, not connected to the Foundation or the Voss network. I'm arranging transport now. She looked at him. You anticipated this. I anticipated Kessler finding out about the disclosure, Julian said. I anticipated him escalating. The specific shape of it I didn't know, but the escalation was inevitable from the moment you opened the archive. My grandfather anticipated it too, she said. He just anticipated it 10 years earlier. Julian almost smiled. The almost was becoming familiar. Her phone rang, Damien. She answered, Serena left my building, Damien said. He was talking fast, not panicked, but pressurized, like someone compressing a large amount of information into the minimum viable space. My building. The one I haven't been to in 3 days. She was in my apartment. Your apartment in the Voss Tower complex? Yes. Security footage shows her entering with a key I didn't know she had. She was there 40 minutes, he stopped. Mara, she knows where my operational files are. The physical copies. If she has those, does she have them? I don't know yet. I have someone going to the apartment now. Don't go yourself, Mara said immediately. Do not go to that building. I know, Damien, hear me, don't go. A short silence. I hear you. Kessler knows the disclosure was filed. He's repositioning right now, and Serena is part of that repositioning. She went to Nadia's building this morning. In your apartment this afternoon, she's collecting whatever physical material she can before the legal process locks everything down. Mara pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Your operational files. What's in them? Transaction records, contact lists, the port contract documentation from the last 18 months. He stopped. And correspondence. Between me and Serena. The temperature of the conversation shifted. Correspondence, Mara said. Emails, some texts. Things he stopped again. Things I said to her when I was telling myself it was just a personal relationship. Things that could be used to argue you were aware of her connection to Kessler. His silence confirmed it. She's building a case against you, Mara said. Not for Kessler. For herself. She's collecting material that she can use to protect herself if Kessler decides she's become a liability. She was thinking fast now, the pieces rearranging themselves. She was in your apartment taking her own exit package. She's going to give him my files and keep the correspondence for herself, Damien said. She's going to give him what he wants and simultaneously make sure she has enough to walk away if he tries to cut her loose. Mara exhaled. She's smarter than either of you gave her credit for. What do I do? Call Marcus Webb right now. Tell him about the correspondence. Tell him everything she might have. Let him get in front of it before she can use it. She paused. And Damien, whatever she took, it's already gone. Don't send anyone to chase her. That's what Kessler wants. He wants you in motion, making visible moves so he can track you. All right, Damien said. He sounded like someone holding a wall up with one hand. Marcus Webb, she said now. She ended the call. Rose appeared at her elbow. We've got movement in the harbor, she said. Single vessel, civilian registration, holding position about 400 meters out. It's been stationary for 11 minutes. Surveillance? Can't confirm from here. It's within legal anchoring distance, which means we can't challenge it. Roz's jaw was set. Could be nothing. Could be a position point. How many people can fit on a vessel that size? 6 to 8 comfortably. So if it's not nothing. It's enough for a boarding team, Rose said. If they were going to try. Mara looked out at the water. She couldn't see the vessel from where she was standing. The harbor's angle was wrong, but she felt it out there the way you felt things when your body had been running on adrenaline long enough to start interpreting ambient information as threat. Get Julian, she said. Julian was already coming up the companionway. I saw it on the monitor, he said. He had his phone in his hand. I'm calling the harbor authority now. Reporting a vessel behaving in a manner consistent with obstruction. Will that do anything? It will create a record. It will also tell whoever is on that vessel that we've noticed them and we're documenting. He was already dialing. It changes the calculation. Kessler doesn't want documentation. He never wants documentation. He moved to the rail and made the call. Mara watched him, his posture, his voice, the careful, precise language of someone who knew how to make official contact without sounding alarmed. She was aware, watching him, of how much she'd come to rely on his competence in 72 hours, and she was also aware that she needed to be careful about that reliance, because the only person whose judgment she could fully trust in a situation like this was herself. Her grandfather had understood that too. He'd worked with Julian for 20 years, and he'd still encrypted the archive under his own biometric. He'd still built the stakeholder position quietly, without telling anyone the full picture. He'd still written the letter himself by hand and sent it to her directly. Trust was not the same as dependence. She went below deck. She needed to think without the wind and the horizon and the waiting vessel 400 meters out. She went back to the archive room and sat in front of the monitor and opened the port access logs, the ones from the Kessler-adjacent shipping entity, the ones that constituted the deepest layer of her grandfather's surveillance architecture. She scrolled to the most recent entries. Kessler's network used 2 specific berths at the port of Tacoma. Regular scheduling, roughly 3-week intervals. Cargo manifests that were technically legitimate, but when cross-referenced with the financial records in the archive, showed a pattern of underreported container weights that was consistent with she stopped. She stared at the screen. The next scheduled use of those berths was in 4 days. 4 days. She picked up the phone and called Christine Mao. Christine answered on the second ring. "The port access logs," Mara said without preamble. "I need to know if they're included in the disclosure package your courier delivered today." "They are," Christine said, labeled under Exhibit 7. "Did you forward Exhibit 7 to the Federal Investigation Unit?" "To the supervising attorney, yes. 2 hours ago." Mara exhaled. "There's a scheduled port operation in 4 days that will fall under the pattern documented in those logs. If federal investigators can position to observe..." "I'm already on it," Christine said. The supervising attorney flagged it 30 minutes after receiving the exhibit. "They're coordinating with Port Authority now." Mara sat back. "You move fast." "Your grandfather's documentation is extraordinarily thorough," Christine said. "It makes my job substantially easier. He spent 10 years on it. It shows." A pause. "Ms. Ellison, I want to be direct with you about something." "Go ahead." "The disclosure and the port operation give us the legal framework. But Kessler has had 48 hours since Holt's death to understand how exposed he is, and a man in his position at that level of exposure is not rational, in the way people are rational when they have less to lose." Christine's voice was measured, not unkind. "He knows the port operation is now compromised. He'll know that within hours, if he doesn't already, which means the value of the next 4 days. Is that he might try to accelerate something else?" Mara said. "Yes. He'll try to get to me before the port operation becomes moot for him. Because if I'm not available to testify, the disclosure has less direct impact. That's the risk." "Yes." Mara thought about the vessel 400 meters out. She thought about Rose's number, 6 to 8 comfortably. "Christine," she said, "if something happens to me, what is the status of the disclosure?" A pause. "It's filed. It exists in the legal record regardless of your status. But my testimony, your affidavit is attached to the disclosure as a sworn statement. It carries evidentiary weight without live testimony." Christine paused again. "You're not the last line here, Ms. Ellison. You built something much more durable than that." "My grandfather built it," Mara said. "You activated it," Christine said. "That's not nothing." She ended the call. She sat in the archive room for a moment, with the monitor's light on her face and the sound of the water through the hull and the sound of her own breathing, and she thought about what durable meant, what it felt like to have built something that could survive you. Her grandfather had known he was dying for 2 years before he went. He'd spent those 2 years making sure the thing he'd built was structured to outlast him. He hadn't told her. He'd written her a letter instead, and trusted that the letter would find her when she was ready to read what it actually said. She understood him now in a way she hadn't before. Not the finance, not the architecture of the foundation. The decision. The choice to build something patient and quiet and durable, and then trust someone else to use it. She stood up. She went back up to the deck. The vessel 400 meters out was gone. Mara registered this before Rose said anything, scanning the harbor automatically, and the absence of the vessel was somehow worse than its presence had been. A static threat was a known thing. A threat that moved was a variable. "It moved off 6 minutes ago," Rose said. "Heading south." "Toward what?" "There's a secondary marina 2 miles south. Private slips." Julian was at the rail. He lowered his binoculars. "It could have been nothing," he said. "Or it repositioned," Mara said. "Yes." They stood in that. The harbor moved around them. Other vessels going about other business. The port cranes visible in the middle distance. Everything proceeding with its ordinary industrial indifference. Then Mara's phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. 2 words: "Look east." She turned. East of their position, approximately 200 meters, a small rigid hull inflatable was sitting in the water. One person aboard. Female. Even at that distance, even without binoculars, Mara recognized the way she sat. Serena. Rose had the binoculars up immediately. Single occupant. No visible weapon. She's not moving toward us. She's waiting to be acknowledged, Mara said. Could be a draw play, Rose said.
Get your attention fixed east,
while something comes from another direction. I know, Mara said. Keep day on the water perimeter. Don't shift positioning. She looked at Julian. I want to talk to her. Mara, she came alone. She texted me directly, not through Kessler. She's not running a draw play. She's making a different kind of move. She held out her hand. I need a radio. Something that works at 200 meters. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded at Rose, who unclipped a handheld radio from her vest and held it out. Mara took it. She stood at the rail and keyed the radio. Serena static. Then you have good eyes. I had a description, Mara said. You're alone. Yes. Kessler doesn't know you're here. A pause. No, Mara looked at her across the 200 meters of gray water. The woman who had sat on the arm of the couch and watched with her ankles crossed. The woman who had asked Damien careful questions about Mara's walking routes and sleeping patterns. The woman who that morning had been inside Nadia's building planting a device and inside Damien's apartment taking correspondence that could be used as leverage. What do you want? Mara asked. I want to make a deal, Serena said. Not with Kessler. With you. Why me? Because you're the only person in this situation who has the authority to make a deal that holds. A pause. And because Kessler is going to kill me. Not today. Maybe not this month. But he's decided I've accumulated too much that he doesn't control. And men like him don't leave that unresolved. You took his operational files and your correspondence with Damien this morning, Mara said. Yes, you were building your exit, yes, and he found out. A longer pause. He found out 40 minutes ago. Which is why I'm here instead of wherever he expected me to be. Mara looked at the inflatable. Sora sitting in it with her hands visible, which Mara was aware was either genuine good faith or a very sophisticated performance. And the only way to know which was to make a decision based on incomplete information, which was, she was beginning to understand, the condition of every decision that actually mattered. The correspondence you took from Damien's apartment, Mara said. You still have it? Yes. Is it on you right now? Encrypted on a drive, yes. If you give that to me, not to Julian, not to Christine Mao's office, and if you give me whatever you took from Kessler's operational files, I will include your cooperation in this disclosure record. I will tell Christine Mao you came forward voluntarily. Mara paused. I cannot promise you immunity. That's not mine to give. But I can put it on the record that you approached us before the legal process compelled you. That has a value I'm not going to pretend is nothing. Silence from the radio. There's a condition, Mara said. The device you planted in my sister's apartment. You're going to tell me exactly what it is and how to remove it, right now before you come aboard. Another silence. Then it's a standard audio unit. Behind the socket plate on the east wall of the bedroom. Pulls straight out once the plate is removed. It's not armed. It's just a transmitter. Mara handed the radio to Julian and pulled out her phone. She called Nadia. Nadia answered in one ring. What? I need you to go to your apartment, Mara said. Right now. Take Lena with you. Go to the bedroom, east wall, socket plate. Remove the plate and pull out what's behind it. Mara, you said not to. I know. New information. Take Lena so you're not alone. Call me when you have it. She hung up. Took the radio back from Julian. Come aboard, she said to Serena. Julian stepped close. We need to search her before. I know, Mara said quietly. Roz handles the search, but she comes aboard. The inflatable moved toward them. Roz met Serena at the boarding point with an efficiency that was entirely professional and entirely non-negotiable. Serena submitted without argument, arms out, letting Rose work through every pocket and seam. The drive was in her jacket's inside pocket. Roz held it out to Mara, who took it and held it in her closed fist and said nothing. Serena came aboard. Up close, she looked different than she had in the penthouse. Not worse, just more real. The particular grooming that had made her look expensive in a room with expensive people was still present, but underneath it was something that Mara recognized. Exhaustion. Not sleep deprivation. The deeper kind. They looked at each other. I didn't know about the pregnancy, Serena said, when I started. I need you to know that. It doesn't change anything, Mara said. But noted. I said noted. Mara's voice wasn't raised. Come below. They went to the conference room. Julian stayed. Rose posted outside the door. Serena sat across from Mara, and for a moment they were a mirror of Mara and Damien 2 days ago. The same table, the same configuration. Someone sitting across from Mara who needed something from her and was going to have to earn it in the currency of truth. Start from the beginning, Mara said. Not from when you met Damien. From when Kessler recruited you. Serena talked for 40 minutes. Mara listened without interrupting, which required a specific discipline she'd been developing for the past 72 hours, the discipline of not reacting visibly to information that deserved a reaction, of treating incoming data as data rather than as injury. Some of it was what she'd expected, the profile she'd been built on, Damien's vulnerabilities, the pressure points Serena had found and leaned on. Some of it was worse than she'd expected. Some of it, and this was the part she filed carefully into the coldest part of her brain, was genuinely useful. Kessler's had a secondary location. Not in Seattle. 50 miles out, a private property on Hood Canal, where he maintained a working office for operations he didn't want near the city. The property had a dock. The property had staff who had seen things. He's there right now, Serena said. He drove out last night. He called me this morning from the canal. Mara looked at Julian. Julian looked back at her. Does Christine Mao have this? Mara asked. No. Kessler's been careful to keep the canal property completely off the record. No employees file taxes under entities connected to him. No utilities in his name. The property was purchased through a shell 4 layers deep, but you've been there 3 times. You know the address. Yes. Mara leaned forward. Write it down. Serena wrote it on the legal pad. Mara looked at the address. She thought about Petra Holt driving north on the I-5 at 11:40 p.m. with her case files on the seat beside her. She thought about a controlled road and clear weather and the specific patience of a man who'd been planning 20 years' worth of exits. She picked up the phone and called Christine Mao. Christine answered immediately. I need you to call the supervising attorney again, Mara said, right now. I have a secondary location residential operational off-record. Property address. She read it from the pad. My source has direct knowledge of the property and its use. She's aboard the vessel and available to provide a sworn statement within the hour. Who is the source? Christine asked. Mara looked at Serena. Serena met her eyes. Serena Vale, Mara said. Former operative for Victor Kessler. She came forward voluntarily. A brief pause. I'll make the call, Christine said. The next hour was controlled chaos. Mara sat in the conference room while Julian coordinated with Christine's office. Rose kept her position outside the door. Serena sat across from Mara and gave her statement by phone to a junior attorney in Christine's office, speaking in the same direct, accurate way she'd spoken to Mara, with the specific credibility of someone who had nothing left to protect by lying. Mara's phone rang. Nadia. Got it, Nadia said. It's about the size of a pack of gum, just sitting behind the plate. Good. Take it outside and put it in a dumpster on a different block, not the one closest to your building. Mara. Yeah. Are you all right? Mara looked at the table, the legal pad, Serena's handwriting with the Hood Canal address, the drive from Damien's apartment in her closed fist, still there, the weight of it specific and strange. I'm getting there, she said. She hung up. Her lower back had been speaking to her for the past hour in increasingly clear terms. She shifted in the chair and the baby moved not the slow equilibrium roll, but something more deliberate, a push outward, like testing the limits of available space. 3 weeks, she said. To no one in particular. Serena looked at her. Is she okay? She's fine. She's running out of room. Mara looked at Serena. You said Kessler decided you've accumulated too much. When did you know? 4 days ago, Serena said. He had someone following me. I made the tail on the second day. When I confronted him, he said it was routine security. It wasn't routine. She looked at the table. He started doing it 3 days after you moved aboard this vessel, when he realized you hadn't warned him I was coming, Mara said. Yes. Because you didn't know. Because Damien didn't know, and I didn't know Damien didn't know. She paused. Your grandfather's attorney contacted you directly. There was nothing in Damien's behavior to suggest you were about to activate the foundation. You'd shown no interest for years. I'd shown no visible interest, Mara said. Serena looked at her. You knew, didn't you? Before Julian came to the literacy center, you knew what you had. Mara thought about the letter at the bottom of the box. The word controlling. The decision to ignore it for 3 years. Not exactly, she said. But I knew there was something worth ignoring. And things you choose to ignore are usually things you're not ready for yet. A sound from above deck. Not Rose. Julian's footsteps fast, coming down the companionway. He opened the door. Hood Canal property, he said. Federal team is moving. They're requesting we hold position and maintain communication. He paused, and Kessler knows. How? Someone in the attorney's office, not Christine's, the supervising attorneys. There's a leak. He was warned 40 minutes ago. Julian's face was doing the tight, controlled thing. He's not at the canal property anymore. Where is he? Julian looked at her steadily. Harbor masters are reporting an unscheduled vessel departure from the canal's private marina. 40-foot cruiser, heading north, towards Seattle. Toward them, Mara stood up. Her chair scraped back. She put her hand flat on the table and looked at Julian, and felt the full weight of the past 72 hours converge into a single point of clarity. How long, she said. At that vessel's speed, Julian said, approximately 90 minutes. She looked at Serena. Does he have weapons aboard that vessel? Serena didn't hesitate. Yes, personal, small arms, and 2 of his security people. He doesn't travel with a large team. He thinks it draws attention. She paused. But the 2 he uses are not people you want to meet. Mara looked at Julian. Get Rose, get Christine Mao on the phone. Get the federal team diverted from Hood Canal to the harbor. She moved toward the door. And get the engine started. We're moving? Julian asked. We're not sitting here waiting for him to pull up alongside us. She was already in the corridor. We're moving into the main harbor channel, where there are other vessels, where there are harbor authority cameras, where anything he does is visible to 50 witnesses. She stopped and looked back at Julian. He doesn't want witnesses. You said it yourself. Julian was already on his phone. Ross appeared at the top of the companionway. I heard engines warming now. Mara went up to the deck. The October sky had gone the color of old pewter, and the wind had picked up, and she stood at the bow with her hand on the rail and looked north across the harbor water, toward the invisible point where the canal met the Sound, where a 40-foot cruiser was heading toward her at whatever speed a man with nothing left to protect could push an engine to. Her heart was doing something large in her chest. She let it do it. There was no managing the physical reality of the moment, and she was done pretending there was. She thought about her grandfather standing somewhere on this vessel, or one like it 40 years ago, making the first of the quiet decisions that had led to this moment. She thought about what he'd written, that she was the one who would wait until she needed it, that she'd spend it doing something. She was doing something. The engines changed pitch below her feet. The Aurelia began to move. Julian came up beside her. Federal team is redirecting. ETA to harbor mouth is 40 minutes. Kessler's ETA is 90. Yes, we have a window. In that window, I want to be in the main channel with harbor authority, aware of our position and the approaching vessel. She looked at Julian, and I want Damien on the phone. Damien, he said he'd testify, she said. I need him to say it to Marcus Webb today, on the record, while I'm moving this ship through this harbor toward a confrontation with the man who built the situation that destroyed both our lives. She paused. I need him to make the right choice right now while it's still his choice, and not something that's being extracted from him. Julian held her gaze for a moment. Then he handed her the phone with Damien's number already dialed. It rang twice. Mara, Damien said. Kessler is on a boat heading toward us, she said. He has weapons and 2 security people, and he knows the federal case is closing around him. He's 90 minutes out. I need you to call Marcus Webb right now, and I need you to give him everything. Not the selective version. Everything. Because when this is over, I need the record to show that you made this choice before it was made for you. She paused. You have 30 minutes, Damien. This is yours to do. A silence that was not empty. She could hear him breathing. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She ended the call and looked north across the water. The Aurelia moved forward into the harbor channel, the main arterial water, where the other vessels were, where the cameras were, where the witnesses were. 90 minutes. She was still standing at the bow when Rose appeared beside her and said quietly, Vessel sighted at the harbor mouth. Mara turned. It was earlier than 90 minutes. Much earlier. Either the cruiser was faster than Serena had estimated, or it had been closer to begin with, or Victor Kessler had a second vessel that nobody had known about, and the cruiser from the canal had been the diversion. She looked at the vessel entering the harbor mouth. She looked at Julian. Julian was already on the phone with the harbor authority, voice controlled and rapid, and Rose had her radio out, and below deck she could feel the engine respond as the helm adjusted, and the Aurelia turned in the harbor channel with the slow deliberateness of a large vessel, making a decision, and Mara gripped the rail and looked at the oncoming boat and felt something in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite fury, but lived in the country between them. Something that had been building since a cold October evening. when she'd stood in an elevator with an overnight bag and felt something go quiet inside her. It wasn't quiet anymore. The vessel was a 42-foot cruiser, white hull, no name visible from the Aurelia's deck. It had come from the south, not the north. That was the tell. The canal was north. Whatever boat Serena had described, whatever timeline Mara had been given, Kessler had been closer the entire time. He'd been holding position somewhere in the Sound, waiting for the federal team to commit to the canal redirect, waiting for the window that the leak inside the supervising attorney's office had given him. Rose had her radio up. Harbor Authority. This is the Aurelia. We have an unidentified vessel approaching on an intercept, heading in the main channel, requesting immediate. The cruiser came in fast. Not ramming speed controlled, deliberate, the speed of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and wanted you to see that they knew. It pulled alongside with 30 feet of water between hulls and held there, engines working against the current to maintain position, and for 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Kessler appeared on the cruiser's deck. He looked exactly like the security camera image. Heavy build, late 50s, the patience still in him even now, even here, in the main harbor channel with the Aurelia's engines running. And Rose on the radio and Julian 3 feet behind Mara with his phone to his ear. He looked like a man who had decided something and was proceeding with the decision. He had a man on each side of him, both large, both watching Rose. He looked at Mara. "Miss Ellison," he said. His voice carried over the water without difficulty. "I'd like to come aboard." "You're not coming aboard," Mara said. "Then we'll have this conversation at volume," he said. "I don't mind. I suspect you do." Behind her, Julian said quietly, "Harbor Authority is responding. Federal team has been redirected, but they're 40 minutes out. Coast Guard is closer 15, maybe 20 minutes." Mara gripped the rail. The October wind was coming off the water at an angle that cut through her coat, and she felt it in her shoulders, in the back of her neck, in the place her spine had been aching since yesterday. The baby was low and heavy and still, which was either because the movement had stopped or because she'd stopped registering it under everything else. "What do you want?" she called across the water. Kessler tilted his head slightly, like the question was necessary, but he'd answer it anyway. "I want 5 minutes. Reasonable conversation. No one needs to be standing on a boat deck in this wind. Say what you have to say from there." A pause. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the empty berth from the dock patient, assessing, not angry. She was starting to understand that the patience was not a performance. It was how he was built. He'd been patient for 20 years, while her grandfather built the case against him. He'd been patient while Serena moved through Damien's organization. He'd been patient, watching Mara ignore her inheritance for 3 years. Patient men were dangerous men. Patient men had time. "The disclosure is filed," he said. "I know that. The Hood Canal property, I know that, too. I'm not here to reverse what's already been done." He paused. "I'm here because there's still a choice in front of you that matters." "There's no choice," she said. "The material is in legal hands. My testimony is recorded. Serena Vale is aboard this vessel and has given a voluntary statement. You have nothing left to negotiate with." Something moved across his face. Not anger. She watched for anger and didn't find it, which was the wrong outcome. "Serena," he said. Not a question. He was locating a variable. He looked at the deck, at the companionway, as if he could see through it to wherever Serena was below. And in that look, Mara saw the thing she'd been trying to read since the radio conversation, the calculation. He hadn't come here to negotiate the archive. He hadn't come here for the disclosure. He'd come here for Serena. "She's under protection of this vessel and cooperating with federal investigators," Mara said. "She's not yours anymore." "She took something from me," he said. "Operational material. That's not a federal matter. That's a personal one." "Everything she took is in protected legal custody," Mara said. This was not entirely true. The drive was still in Mara's fist, but her voice didn't move when she said it, and she needed it not to move. Kessler looked at her. He looked at her hand on the rail. He looked at her closed fist. She made herself open it. Slowly, deliberately, she uncurled her fingers and placed her open hand on the rail, palm down. "Nothing to recover," she said. "Go home, Mr. Kessler." He was quiet for a moment. Then one of the men beside him moved. Not toward the rail, not toward Mara. He moved to the cruiser's helm, and the cruiser's engine pitch changed, a deepening that meant something, and Rose stepped forward immediately. "He's going to run," Rose said. "No," Mara said. She looked at Kessler. He was still looking at her. His expression had done something she hadn't seen before, not patience, not calculation. Something older and flatter. "The port operation," she said. "Tacoma, 4 days from now. Federal surveillance is already positioned. Your contact in the supervising attorney's office has been identified. That was your leak, and it's also your exposure. The wire transfer records are in Christine Mao's hands, and they're structured in a way my grandfather specifically designed to be irrefutable. She paused. You spent 20 years making sure no single person had enough to end you. You missed the one person who was collecting it quietly in a foundation you didn't take seriously. Something shifted in his eyes. The flatness changed. He played a long game, Kessler said. I'll grant him that. He didn't play it to win, Mara said. He played it so that when someone eventually pushed his family hard enough, there would be something to fight back with. She held his gaze. You pushed. The harbor water moved between the hulls. The cruiser's engine held its new pitch, ready to move. You should get a lawyer, she said. Not the one your network usually uses. Someone outside. Someone who can advise you on what cooperation looks like at this stage, because the window for it is small and it's closing. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, across 30 feet of harbor water, you're not ordinary. She felt the word hit her somewhere specific, not a wound, more like the closing of one. No, she said, I'm not. The cruiser pulled back. Not fast controlled, the same deliberate precision it had arrived with. Kessler didn't look away until the gap between the hulls was wide enough that looking away became the only option. And then he did, and the cruiser moved south through the harbor channel. Rose on the radio immediately, relaying the vessel description and heading to harbor authority. Julian was on his phone. Mara stood at the rail, with both hands open on the metal, and breathed. Her lower back chose this moment to deliver a pain that was not the familiar ache, but something sharper, lower, more serious. She gripped the rail. It passed. Not entirely, it receded, which was different. Julian, she said. He was beside her in 3 steps. He looked at her face and read something in it. How far apart? He asked. That was the first one, she said. That I'm sure about. He put his hand under her elbow. Not forceful, just present. I'm calling a water taxi to meet us at the nearest dock, he said. We're getting you off this vessel. The federal team will proceed without you. Everything is filed. Everything is documented. Christine Mao does not need you to go into labor on a boat to close this case. His voice was steady in a way that was specifically calibrated to her. She recognized it and was grateful for it. Let me call the taxi. Call Nadia first, she said. He called Nadia first. Kessler was arrested at the harbor mouth by Coast Guard 11 minutes later. His 2 security people surrendered without resistance, which told Mara something about how they'd assessed the situation. They were pragmatic men who'd calculated the moment the balance shifted. Kessler himself was taken off the cruiser with the same patience he'd had standing on the dock, looking at the empty berth. She heard this later from Christine Mao, who described the arrest with the spare language of someone reporting a result rather than a drama. Kessler had said nothing. He'd cooperated with the physical process of being taken into custody and had asked for his attorney, and it had said nothing else. She heard it later, because by 11 minutes after the confrontation, she was on a water taxi heading for the dock where Nadia was already waiting, and by 30 minutes after that, she was in a hospital where a doctor was telling her that the contractions were real and regular, and that her daughter had decided, apparently, that the day's events had constituted sufficient drama and it was time. Elena Ellison was born at 4:17 in the morning, after 9 hours of labor that Mara would later describe to Nadia as the most purely physical experience of her life, not transcendent, not beautiful in any clean way, just enormous and bodily and real, something that required everything and gave back something that had no equivalent. She was 6 pounds 4 ounces. She had dark hair and her mother's jaw and a quality of attention in her half-open eyes that the nurses commented on, and Mara recognized immediately, because she'd felt it all along, that steady internal presence, the equilibrium-seeking role, the impression of a person who had been adjusting from the very beginning. Nadia held her first and cried without any of her usual armor, which was one of 3 times in Mara's life she'd seen Nadia cry. She pressed her face against Elena's head and made no sound for a long time, and then said into the small dark hair, "Hi, we've been waiting." Damien came at 7 in the morning. He stood in the doorway of the hospital room and looked at Mara in the bed and at Elena in the basins beside her, and Mara watched him understand the full dimensions of what he'd given up. Not the foundation, not the money, not the world he'd been trying to build. The specific this of a person he'd made, who was now existing separately from him in a bassinet, in a room he'd had to ask permission to enter. He didn't come in immediately. He stood in the doorway. Come in, Mara said. He came in. He looked at Elena for a long time without touching her, the way people looked at things they felt they hadn't earned the right to touch. Can I? He started. Yes, Mara said. He picked her up. He held her with the specific terrified care of someone handling something that could break, which was the wrong understanding of Elena, who was not fragile, who had already demonstrated a constitutional robustness that her mother found reassuring. But Mara didn't correct him. Let him learn her on his own terms. He sat in the chair beside the bed and held his daughter and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, I called Marcus Webb. I know. Christine told me. I gave him everything. He looked at the baby, not at Mara. There are going to be consequences. For me specifically. I know. I'm going to cooperate fully. He stopped. That's the right thing. I know it's the right thing. Yes, she said, it doesn't feel like enough. It's not enough, she said, but it's what there is. He looked at Elena. Elena, in the way of very new people, was looking at the general direction of his face with the unfocused attention of someone taking in a new data point. She looks like you, he said. I think she looks like herself, Mara said. He almost smiled. It was the realist expression she'd seen on his face in longer than she could accurately measure. They sat in that room in the particular quiet of early morning, with the city coming awake outside the window, and the hospital's ambient sounds around them, and Mara thought about the things that were going to be true going forward. The divorce would be final within months. Her attorney was efficient, and Damien was not contesting anything. The foundation was now officially hers in every legal and operational sense. Christine Mao had called at 6 in the morning before Damien arrived, while Mara was feeding Elena for the first time and learning the specific mechanics of this, to report that the federal case against Kessler was proceeding with the full archive as its backbone, that Cecina's voluntary testimony had been formally received, and that the port operation in Tacoma would proceed under federal surveillance as scheduled. She'd listened to this with Elena's weight in her arms and the hospital's dawn light on the window, and had felt something she hadn't expected, not triumph. Exhaustion, yes. Relief, yes. But the dominant thing was something quieter, more interior. The particular stillness of a person who has done what they came to do and is now standing on the other side of it, looking back at the distance, traveled and trying to locate themselves in the aftermath. She'd located herself in the aftermath. She was here. Her daughter was here. The thing her grandfather had built was in the right hands and doing what it was designed to do. The men who had underestimated her were facing the consequences of that underestimation. None of it felt the way she'd thought it would feel from the inside of it. It felt smaller and larger simultaneously. It felt like the beginning of something rather than the end, which was not the same as a sequel. It was more like the point at which a person stops performing and starts living the life they've been protecting. Damien left at 9. He handed Elena back to Mara with the care of someone handling something borrowed, which in a sense she was his to know, not to own, a distinction Mara intended to make very clear over the years ahead when the time was right. At the door he turned. The thing I said, he said. That word. She looked at him. I've thought about it every day, he said. Not because I'm trying to make it better. It doesn't get better. I wanted you to know that I know what it cost. She looked at him steadily. I know you know, she said. Is that enough? It's true, she said. Whether it's enough is a longer question. He nodded. He left. Nadia came back at 10, with coffee that Mara wasn't supposed to have too much of, and a bag of things she'd brought from the apartment, and an expression that said she'd been holding things in reserve for several hours, and was now prepared to stop. She sat beside the bed and looked at Elena sleeping in the bassinet and said, She's going to be something. Yeah, Mara said. You okay? Mara thought about this. Not the reflexive version of okay, but the actual assessment. I'm tired, she said. I'm more tired than I've ever been. And I lost something, not just Damien, not just the marriage, but the version of the life I thought I was going to have. The quiet version. Nadia was looking at her carefully. But I don't think the quiet version was going to be enough, Mara said. I think I knew that for a long time, and I called it contentment instead. She looked at Elena. She's not going to grow up, watching her mother make herself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of what she should be. No, Nadia said. She's not. That's worth something. It's worth a lot, Nadia said. They sat with that. 3 months later, Mara stood in the main office of the Literacy Center's new location, a ground-floor space on Capitol Hill, 3 times the size of the old Eastlake room, funded through the Ellison Foundation's first formal grant to a Seattle-based educational nonprofit, which happened to be itself a legal structure Christine Mao had arranged with characteristic efficiency. The new space had large windows and good light, and shelves that went floor to ceiling on the east wall, and 27 kids had come through the door on the first day, which was 11 more than the old location's best day. Julian was there. He was not comfortable in rooms with small children, which she'd learned in that plus 3 months, and found endearing in a way she would never tell him because it would make him self-conscious. He stood near the door with Elena in the carrier against his chest. Mara had asked him to hold her because her arms were needed for a reading demonstration, and he looked like a man who had been handed a live grenade and had decided to handle it with great precision. Elena looked up at him from the carrier with the focused attention she brought to everything. She was 3 months old and already watching the world as if she was compiling data on it. "She's staring at me," Julian said quietly when Mara came near. "She does that," Mara said. "She's deciding what she thinks of you. And? You're still holding her, so I'd say the verdict's favorable." He looked down at Elena with an expression that was more unguarded than his usual register. Mara noted it and said nothing, because some things deserved space. The Kessler case moved through the federal system with the thoroughness that came from having 40 years of meticulous documentation as its backbone. Kessler himself had followed Mara's advice, the advice she'd given him across 30 feet of harbor water and retained outside counsel, which his network's usual attorney had considered a betrayal, and which his outside counsel had considered the only viable path. He cooperated on the financial structure in exchange for mitigation consideration on the more serious charges. The port operation in Tacoma had produced the physical evidence that translated the archive's documentation into something a jury could hold. Serena received reduced charges in exchange for her testimony. She left Seattle. Mara didn't know where she went and didn't ask. What she knew was that Serena's testimony had been specific, accurate, and delivered without performance, and that it had cost Serena something to give it in the way that all honest accounting costs something. She thought about Serena's face in the conference room aboard the Aurelia, the real version of her, not the cultivated one. She thought about the particular exhaustion in it. She didn't forgive her. Forgiveness wasn't the right category. But she held Serena's choices with a complexity that was different from contempt, and she thought that was probably as close to fair as she could get from where she was standing. Damien's cooperation moved his case toward a resolution that would involve consequences, civil, financial, a restructured life, but not the consequences that would have come without it. He was in Seattle. He saw Elena on a schedule that Mara's attorney had negotiated, and that Mara supervised with the careful attention of someone who had decided to be honest about what he could and couldn't be trusted with, and to let that assessment change if the evidence changed. He showed up when he was supposed to. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. These were not heroic qualities. They were baseline adult qualities. She gave him credit for the baseline and did not give credit for what was not there. And she thought this was probably the right framework for the long years of co-parenting that stretched out ahead of them. She was not happy about it. She was also not destroyed by it. Both things were true, and she'd stopped trying to collapse them into a single feeling. 6 months after Elena's birth, Mara stood on the deck of the Aurelia on a May evening, when the Seattle sky had gone that specific shade of pale gold that it reached sometimes in late spring, the light landing on the water at an angle that made everything look deliberate. Elena was in the carrier against her chest, awake, looking at the water, with her characteristic focused attention. Julian came up from below and stood beside her at the rail, close enough to be present, far enough to be his own person, which was, she had learned, the distance he operated at with everyone he trusted. "Christine called," he said. "I know, I called her back." She looked at the water. "The appeal's been filed. It'll take time." "It'll hold," Julian said. "Probably," she said. She'd learned not to say certainly about things she couldn't control. Julian looked at Elena. Elena had turned her head and was looking at the cranes in the port with the patience of someone waiting for them to do something interesting. "Your grandfather would have." Julian started and then stopped. "What?" Mara asked. He was quiet a moment. "He would have said you moved faster than he expected. He thought it would take you longer to be ready." She looked at the water. "I wasn't ready," she said. "I was just out of options." "Sometimes that's the same thing," Julian said. She thought about the elevator, the overnight bag, the bench outside the closed coffee shop in the rain. She thought about sitting on Nadia's pull-out sofa on sheets with faded crabs on them, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the word ordinary and what it had cost her to let someone else define her with it for as long as she had. She thought about her grandfather writing a letter by hand and trusting that she would eventually become the person who could use what he'd left her. She thought about what it meant to become that person. Not the foundation, not the legal victories, not the confrontation in the harbor, the becoming. The long, unglamorous process of deciding that you would not make yourself smaller than you were just because someone with a loud voice insisted on your smallness. Elena made a sound. Not words she wasn't there yet, but a specific purposeful noise, directed at the cranes as if commenting on their continued stillness. Mara laughed. It was a real laugh, unfactured, the kind that came up from somewhere you couldn't access deliberately. I know, she said to Elena. They're not doing anything. Very disappointing. Elena looked at her. The focused attention turned inward from the harbor to her mother's face. Mara looked back at her daughter. This person. 3 months ago, she hadn't existed outside of Mara's body, and now she was here in the May light with opinions about cranes, looking at her mother's face with the absolute trust of someone who had not yet learned to protect herself from the things she loved, and would not need to learn for a while yet, because Mara had already decided that whatever she built, with the years and the resources and the carefully documented power her grandfather had left her, the first thing it was going to protect was this. Not the foundation, not the archive, not the legal case. This. A reporter called the following week, wanting a quote for a piece about the Kessler case and the role the Ellison Foundation had played in its prosecution. Mara took the call at her desk in the Foundation's new Seattle office, a modest space, not the kind that announced itself, and answered 2 questions and declined 3. And was about to end the call when the reporter asked a final question. How does it feel? The reporter asked. To go from the narrative is pretty striking. Woman dismissed, woman rises. How does it feel to be on the other side of it? Mara looked at her desk. The legal pad with her handwriting on it. The photograph of Elena that she'd put in a frame on the corner of the desk. Not because she needed reminding, but because she wanted it visible to anyone who sat across from her. She wanted the thing that mattered most to be the first thing seen. I didn't rise, she said. I just stopped pretending I was smaller than I was. And Damien Voss? Is there anything? He's going to be a good father, she said. That's what I want people to know about Damien Voss, not the rest of it. He's going to work at being a good father, and he's going to get there. That's the part that matters to me. She ended the call. She sat for a moment at her desk in the modest office, with the May light coming through the window and the photograph of Elena at the corner of her vision, and thought about her grandfather, who had spent 40 years building something patient and quiet and durable, and who had written her a letter by hand and trusted that she would find it when she needed it. She picked up a pen. She started writing, not documentation, not legal correspondence, a letter. To Elena, who couldn't read it yet, who was currently asleep in the Foundation's small side room where Nadia was watching her, who would eventually grow into a person who could read and understand what her mother had wanted to say to her before she was old enough to ask. She wrote, "There's going to come a time when someone tells you what you are. Someone who thinks they know. Someone who says it with the certainty of a person who has decided. And they'll say it in a way that makes you feel like the decision is final." She stopped, looked at what she'd written, started again. She wrote, "What I want you to know is that the quiet things you build in private are the only things that can't be taken in public. Take your time. Be patient. And when the moment comes, and it will come, don't let anyone else's failure of imagination become the ceiling of your life." She put down the pen. Outside, the May light moved on the water. The cranes in the port were finally doing something. She could see the movement from her window. One of them swinging slowly with something in its grip, patient and enormous and entirely unbothered by being watched. Elena would have approved. Mara folded the letter and put it in her desk drawer. She'd add to it over the years. She already knew this, already felt the shape of all the things she hadn't said yet, all the things that would come clear as Elena grew, and the world showed itself to her in increments. For now, this was enough. The woman who had been called ordinary sat at her desk in the quiet office in the May light, and worked, and was not waiting for anyone, and was not performing for anyone, and was not measuring herself against anyone's idea of what she should have been. She was exactly what her grandfather had believed she would become, and she had gotten there not because it was easy or clean or without cost, but because the alternative was a life lived inside someone else's limitations. And that, finally, was the one thing she had never been willing to accept. She stayed at the desk until the light changed. That was how she'd always measured the end of a working day, not the clock, not a calendar notification, but the specific shift in the quality of light through the window, the The moment when the gold thinned out and the blue came in underneath it, and the harbor took on that particular late afternoon gravity that made everything look like it was settling into itself for the night. She'd done it in the Literacy Center's old location, done it in Nadia's apartment kitchen, done it in the archive room aboard the Aurelia, with porthole light instead of window light. It was the one habit she'd carried unbroken through everything that had broken. She closed the files on her desk and capped the pen and sat for a moment in the specific quiet of an office, after the work is done, but before you've committed to leaving. Nadia appeared in the doorway with Elena against her shoulder, awake now, looking at the room with the evaluating attention she brought to every new visual field. "She's been up for 20 minutes, Nadia said. "She's been very focused on the ceiling in there. I think she found something." "She always finds something," Mara said. She held out her arms, and Nadia transferred Elena across, with the practiced ease of someone who had become, over 3 months, genuinely competent at the mechanics of handing a baby to another person without either party minding. Elena settled against Mara's chest and looked up at her mother's face, and did the thing she did, the long, steady, undefended looking, the kind that adults lost somewhere around age 2 and spent the rest of their lives trying to recover in therapists' offices and meditation retreats. Mara looked back at her. "Hi," she said. "Long day." Elena's mouth moved. Not words. Something more preliminary than words, the muscular preparation for language, the rehearsal of shapes. She was practicing. Even now, 3 months in, she was already practicing. "Julian called while you were finishing up," Nadia said. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, which was her resting posture, when she had something to say and was deciding how to say it. He said the Foundation Board wants to schedule a formal transition meeting. Something about the investment committee and the new port contract review. "I know, I saw his message." "Are you going to do it?" "The meeting?" "Yes, the whole thing," Nadia said. "The port contracts, the investment committee, the all of it. The full version of what this is now." She paused. "Because 3 months ago, you were running a literacy program on a grant budget that required you to write 3 applications a quarter just to keep the lights on. And now, you're—" "I know what I am now," Mara said. "I know you know." Nadia's voice was not challenging. It was the voice she used when she was genuinely asking. "I just want to make sure you want it. Not because it fell into your lap and you felt obligated. Not because of Kessler or Damien or any of the things that pushed you here. Because you actually want it." Mara looked at her daughter. She thought about the archive room. The hours she'd spent reading her grandfather's documentation. Not because she had to. Not because Julian was waiting. But because she'd found herself genuinely hungry for it, for the structure of it, the patience embedded in it, the particular intelligence of a man who had understood that power built quietly was the only kind that lasted. She'd felt something in those hours that she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe hadn't felt ever in quite that form. She'd felt like herself, the full version. The one she'd been trimming down to fit inside other people's expectations of her for longer than she could honestly track. "I want it," she said. "Not all of it the way it was. I'm going to reshape some of the investment positions. There are 2 that I think my grandfather held for strategic reasons that no longer apply. And the Foundation's philanthropic arm needs more structure. The grants process is too informal." She looked at Nadia. "But yes, I want it." Nadia nodded. That was all just the nod, which from Nadia was equivalent to a lengthy speech. "Good," she said. "Then I'm going to go get dinner, because I've been here since 11. And I would like to keep something that isn't the granola bar I found in your desk drawer. There's a better one in the bottom drawer. I found that one too." Nadia pushed off the doorframe. She stopped, turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, and her voice had shifted into the register she used for things she meant entirely. "He was wrong about you. He was wrong from the beginning, and I know you know that. But I want to keep saying it until it stops needing to be said." Mara looked at her sister, at the jaw they'd both inherited, the set of it, the particular stubbornness encoded in the bone. "It's getting there," she said. "It needs to be said less than it did 3 months ago." "Progress," Nadia said. She left. Mara stood at the window with Elena and looked at the harbor. The Aurelia was visible from this angle. Julian had moved it to a permanent berth closer to the Foundation's office. A practical decision that also felt like something more than practical, the way certain decisions did when they were right, not just logistically, but in some harder-to-name way. The vessel sat in the evening light and did what vessels did, which was hold its position against the current with the engines off, the way a thing stayed in place when it had been built for exactly the conditions it was sitting in. Her grandfather had spent 40 years on and around that vessel. She intended to spend considerably more. Elena made a sound, the purposeful noise, the one that meant she had an opinion about something in her visual field. Mara followed her daughter's gaze. Elena was looking at the Aurelia. Yeah, Mara said, that's ours. The word landed differently than it would have 6 months ago. Not heavier, cleaner. The weight was gone from it. The apologetic weight she'd carried around, inherited things. The sense that wanting what was yours was somehow a confession of inadequacy, as if needing something meant you'd failed at not needing it. She was done with that particular failure of logic. She held her daughter in the May going to June light and looked at the harbor and thought about the letter in her desk drawer, the one she'd start adding to over the years, the one Elena would read someday when she was old enough to need what it said. She thought about what she'd add next. Not today, today was already full, already complete in its own right, but soon. She thought she might write about patience, about the difference between waiting and enduring, about how the things you built quietly, in the hours when no one was watching and the work felt small and insufficient, were the only things that held when everything visible came apart. Her grandfather had known this. She was still learning it, still turning it over, finding new dimensions of it in ordinary moments in the literacy center, in the archive room, in this office with the May light and her daughter's weight against her chest. Ordinary moments. She almost smiled at that. The word had changed shape on her entirely. It no longer meant small or insufficient or beneath consideration. It meant the actual texture of a life, the part that didn't photograph well, the part that was real. She'd take real over glamorous. She'd learned that the hard way, and she was keeping the lesson. Outside, the harbor lights were beginning to come on one by one in the dusk, the way they always did, in the unhurried sequence of things that happened on their own schedule, regardless of what any particular person was going through. The Aurelia sat in its berth. The cranes held their positions. The water moved as water moved, without reference to any of the human things happening at its edges. Mara turned from the window. She picked up the letter from the desk drawer and read what she'd written. Then she uncapped the pen and added one more line at the bottom, below the paragraph about patient building and the sealing of other people's imagination. She wrote, "You were born in the middle of the hardest week of my life, and you made it survivable. Not because you fixed anything. You were 3 weeks old and you couldn't fix anything. But because the fact of you made the cost of getting through it worth paying. That's what love does, when it's real. It doesn't rescue you. It just makes the work of surviving worth the effort." She capped the pen, folded the letter, put it back in the drawer. She turned off the desk lamp. She settled Elena more securely in the carrier. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the office and into the evening, and the door closed behind her, and she didn't look back, because looking back had never been the direction that mattered. Forward was where her daughter was. Forward was where the work was. Forward was the only direction she had ever, in the end, known how to go.